Hi, Misha here, and I tried to find the most Christmas color schemed models on my shelf for this video. To that end, I have two that you haven't seen before, both from the RAE, Royal Aircraft, later Aerospace Establishment, which are testing and research jets. On the left, we have an English Electric. On the right, we have a Panavia. Both are in the distinctive so-called raspberry ripple paint scheme that the research establishment used in the 1980s. This is, of course, the Canberra. This is a model B.6. Originally designed as an interdictor. And this is a Tornado, originally designed as a GR.1 T two-stick trainer. And both were in service in the 1980s at RAE. So I thought, why not, for a Christmas themed video, do a plane that sort of is Christmassy? The establishment really got started way back in 1904 in Farnborough, Hampshire, England. At that time, the balloon factory was set up there to produce, well, balloons as well as airships, dirigibles. They were basically tasked with designing, testing, and building aircraft. And then in 1908, the first aeroplane flight in England took place there. And then the following year, it was put under civilian administration and control, although it still officially belonged to the War Office. Several designs would come out, and then around 1912, it was renamed to the Royal Airplane Factory, the RAF, and design and construction would continue. One of its first designers was actually Geoffrey de Havilland. Another famous employee that would be there later would be Henry Fallon, and many others, including a lot of women along the way. But soon its charter would basically change. The RAF, as it was known at the time, stopped manufacturing, and really would even stop designing for the most part, and basically become a research location. Throughout World War I, it would take part in the war effort, and then after the RAF, Royal Air Force, was officially established on April 1st, 1918, it would have its name changed to the Royal Aircraft Establishment, RAE, to, so people could tell it apart. It would keep in business and keep on doing its thing in the 20s and 30s, and then after actually World War II, a second location would be opened up at Bedford. And then, of course, work would continue there at research, testing, evaluation, new systems, all kinds of cool stuff. And then in 1964, the War Office would basically be morphed into the Ministry of Defense, MOD. So the establishment would fall under its auspices. And then in 1988, the name would be changed to Royal Aerospace Establishment, so still RAE. And in the 90s, post-Cold War, there would be a lot of mergers. It would go through several mergers, name changes, and then in 1994, the Bedford location would be essentially shut down. And then in 2001, the British government would at least partially privatize the establishment, excuse me, losing my voice, at that time known as the DERA. Yeah, basically for Defense Research Establishment. Well, it was Defense, then it was Defense, well, I guess I should say, it was first Defense Research Establishment, DRA, and then it was Defense Evaluation Research Establishment, DERA, because they're British and that's just how they roll. But then after 2001, it was partially privatized and divested, although there still is an airport and some other facilities at the initial Farnborough location. So what about these individual planes, or models of these planes? The Canberra B.6 and the Tornado GR.1. Well, I've already covered the Canberra in a video or two, so I'm not going to go too much into the general aircraft history. I'll just say that the concept dates back to the later years of World War II. The design dates back to immediately post-war. And it was really one of the very first English electric designs of their own. The first prototypes flew in 1949 and were actually ordered by Australia, Britain, and others even before all this was complete. And they were in RAF service officially by 1951. And when the Korean War kicked off, they were given a super priority for production. Before that, they'd kind of been a little bit of a back burner priority. The Canberra was adopted to kind of replace World War II era prop piston type bombers. This is a double jet engine plane. The initial B-1 quickly gave way to the improved B-2 bomber. It's about 65.5 feet long with about a 64-foot wingspan. It's capable of flying just a hair under Mach 0.9 and can get up to about 48 to 49,000 feet maximum altitude. Standard crew of 3. Basically, you had a pilot, navigator, and bombardier. The bomber version could carry about 10,000 pounds, but it wasn't able of carrying the nuclear weapons of the day, which eventually led to its demise. By the mid-50s, newer, larger, more capable bombers, eventually known as the V bombers or V series. The Vulcan, Valiant, and Victor would replace this in the high altitude bombing role. And so the Canberra would be reworked to be a low altitude bomber, also an interdictor, which this originally was here. The B-2 commonly had fuel tanks, external fuel tanks on the wingtips. The T-4, of course, T was a trainer. The B-6 introduced internal wing fuel tanks. And the BI-6 was a bomber interdictor. It had a set of 4 20mm cannon installed in the bomb bay, and it also had additional hardpoints on the wings for carrying bombs or rockets. And it was designed, well, as an interdictor against Soviet bombers, but also for ground attack. But it was always an interim solution until the more capable BI-8 was ready, so only 20 were ordered. This one here was accepted by the RAF in 1955 in April. After testing and approval, it would be stationed temporarily, briefly I should say, in West Germany. And then in July of 1957, it would first fly to the aircraft establishment at Farnborough, where it would stay on kind of temporary transfer until February 28th of 1958, when it was officially transferred on the books from the RAF to the RAE. And so after that, it was redone and put into, I think one of its first missions was weapons testing, armament testing, evaluating new weapons systems, controls, computers. In the 60s, it was painted in white and orange for exposure, and then in the 80s, it was given the Raspberry Ripple scheme. And it continued to serve as a test and evaluation aircraft for altitude projects, control systems, atmospheric research, so on and so forth. Now, the RAE started to kind of mothball its Canberras in the late 80s. I think 1988 was kind of towards the end. And they would either put them in permanent storage or sell or loan them out to other agencies. It's worth pointing out that the Canberra was produced in America under license by Martin as the B-57. In England, they would build 900 of these. In the U.S., they would build just over 400, and just under 50 would be put together in Australia. It was a very successful design. It was used by over 24 nations. And while its time as a bomber and even as an interdictor was quite limited, it would be kept as a reconnaissance observation aircraft. Actually, it was used quite a bit during the 2003 Gulf War, and wasn't officially retired until 2006. But I thought this was a neat model. My other Canberra is a B-2 with the fuel tanks, so that having a BI-6 would be neat, and with the added history of the RAE to boot, because it flew for many years and saw a lot of flight hours and helped a lot of scientific projects. So what about its sister ship here, the Tornado? I hope these planes are suitably red and festive for you. From what my wife says, they're white with red accents, highlights, and then a little bit of other markings in blue. Sorry, I didn't have any red and green planes. Actually, recently I just did an expanded video on the Tornado. And that I looked at a GR.4 and an F3. And like I said, this is a GR.1. In fact, it was the last GR.1 in a sense. The Panavia Tornado has a very cool history. It was a joint project between the UK, Germany, rather West Germany to be exact, and Italy. There were other members of NATO interested, but ones like France dropped out and went their own way. Nevertheless, the prototype first flew in 1974. The British RAF ordered these in 1976, and the very first ones were delivered in mid-1979. And the first operational squadron in the world was British, which came out in the summer of 1982. This aircraft here was originally one of 2 dozen in Phase 1, or Block 1, kind of what we think of as Tranche 1 for the Eurofighter, the first production batch. It was intended to be a GR.1T, 2-seat trainer, or as the Brits call it, a 2-sticker. It was the 8th plane off the production line in 1980, and it was undergoing a series of ground tests, primarily to do with the engines, in July of that year. All was going well for the first week or so, but then on July 31st, 1980, the engines caught fire. Goes to show you, don't try to be smoking and do engine tests. But no, it really was a major fire. It completely wrecked the entire rear fuselage of this aircraft. So much so that it was written off and kind of just, chunked aside. They would continue the production line. From what I understand, Britain would end up with around 17 GR.1T trainers, which it would use for many more years. And this heavily damaged airframe was just stuck aside while they were doing main production. But as production kind of wound down, as the initial orders for the GR.1s were filled for England, Panavia would revisit this and essentially rebuild it. They would put a new rear fuselage on, and it would fly for the first time March of 1983. But unfortunately, because of the damage, it was not eligible for RAF service, and so it ended up at the aircraft establishment, where it would serve for over 22 years. Now, the GR.1 was actually made in several versions, including the 1A for reconnaissance and the 1B for maritime use. They were very prominently featured in the first Gulf War and have been called the most important aircraft designed to come out of the 20th century Europe. It's a very forward-thinking plane. It has sweep wings with rotating pylons under each. The tail also rotates entirely. We have 2 engines, standard crew of 2, and a military jet, pilots up front, the weapons and radar officers in the back. On an experimental test research aircraft such as this, you have a pilot in the front, and you have an observer or someone there to operate any kind of, or monitor any kind of special equipment in the back. So, yeah. So it always seemed like I had 2 on board regardless. It's about 55 feet long, and the wings can be adjusted anywhere from 28 feet spread all the way out to 46 feet. It actually really can't go a lot higher than the Canberra. It can make it to about 50,000 feet, but it is significantly faster. It can achieve Mach 2.2, which is about as fast as any military fighter, interceptor, interdictor aircraft. And the militarized versions are very heavily armed, including 2 cannon, multiple hard points under the fuselage, and 2 main hard points under each wing. Just shy of 1,000 Tornadoes would be produced, although Germany and the UK would pretty much get all of theirs by the mid-80s. Orders and replenishment would be conducted throughout the 90s, with the last customer being Saudi Arabia in 1998, and then the production line was shut down as they were switching over to newer designs like the Eurofighter Typhoon. Anyway, back to this specific one. At the aircraft establishment, this plane was instrumental in testing instruments. It helped pioneer a lot of the technology that would appear on the later GR.4, including terrain-following radar, voice interface control, voice recognition systems for the cockpit, which is something we see on the Eurofighter today. Also new weapons interface and systems, just, whatever. It was a test aircraft for new equipment. And it was also used for certain research projects. Whatever they needed it for. Now, interestingly, beginning in 1994, the whole GR4 program started going forward, and in the late 90s, 97, 98, Britain's fleet of GR1s were pretty much all either upgraded to GR4 or had already been written off, or were written off if they were, high mileage aircraft. So by 2000, 2001 or so, this plane here, and the model it represents, was the only flying GR1 in service in the world. Now, as I said originally, it was meant to be a GR1T, but it was never a trainer. After its rebuild, it was classified as a GR1P. And it is the only GR1P to ever have been made. Now, normally I don't go with prototype or one-off planes, but for one thing, I couldn't find another GR1 model. And for another, I do think it has an interesting history. It's both a P and a T. So I picked it up. It's an older Corgi model. It would continue to serve, and it would take its final flight about a week to 2 weeks before Christmas, 2005, and then was retired at the end of that month from service and put into mothballs. And from there, it's kind of been bounced around. But the good news is, it eventually landed in a profit organization who spent a lot of time, money, energy, blood, sweat, and tears restoring this plane. And as of last year, it's pretty much back to working. They don't really plan to fly it again, but they are doing live taxi runs and stuff, so it can move under its own power again, which is great. It's about the only GR1 in the world that can still do that. Its brethren, the GR4s and the F3s, continued in military service. It was considered to retire them in 2010, but in the end, it wasn't until this year, actually, that they finally did retire them in the UK. So just this year, the Tornado is officially out of service after 40 years. Not too shabby. And again, this particular airplane served the aircraft establishment, the aerospace establishment, for 22 of those years. And it's just neat. The wings, as I showed you, the tail moves. The tail of mine is a little loose, not too bad. It still has detents, but it's a little wobbly. But it actually has very tight wings. For example, the ones on my F3 are a little wiggly. These are very tight. My GR4 wings are also pretty tight, but yeah, the wings are pretty good. It does come with fuel tanks and or just, empty pylons if you want to stick them under the wings, but I kind of like the clean look for this. The canopy can be displayed open or closed or just removed if you want to see the pilots inside. Both of these models, you can have gear up or down. The Canberra 2 has hard points. You can plug in things under the wings, but this particular one doesn't come with tanks or rockets, but you could potentially put something in. Now the Canberra's cockpit is fixed. It doesn't open, although it does have crew inside, but the gears, like I said, can be open or up or down. The Tornado is a little more fancy with more moving parts. What I like about Corgi, their models are very heavy duty metal. Very little plastic on them, and they also come with nice stands. Especially older ones like this entire arm is metal. Not only is it good for strength, it also gives balance, because if you have a plastic stand, but then a heavy duty model on top, it's necessarily top heavy. But if your stand itself has weight, then it's pretty stable, and this one is. And what I like about them, they plug into a hole, but you can also pull them off quite easily, because they kind of use a rubber gasket to go in there. The only thing you have to watch for, some of them, the rubber will deteriorate, but others seem fine. I think you just have to kind of see where the pressure's at. Worst case, you could always remold it. I mean, making rubber's not that hard. But yeah, since I have never shown you colorful aircraft before, I tend to usually have the military ones. For the holidays, I figured why not. Plus, hey, now we get a GR1 and we get a BI6. And each of these has a pretty unique and colorful history. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. Check out some other videos if you could, please. Otherwise, I greatly appreciate you tuning in. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's and all that good stuff. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.